So because I've been putting off this video for a long time and it's really kind of my most pressing, these ideas are kind of burning within me. I felt like tonight I'm out of excuses. I had to get makeup on for a job interview, so we're doing this video, which is months and months overdue. And we're going to be talking about something that I feel like affects pretty much everyone because our society gets this concept um, quite wrong. I think in first world Eurocentric society, we especially get it wrong, and then in America we probably take it to the extreme um, of not understanding this and not teaching our children correctly. And I would say this is one of the biggest lessons that I've learned in my life. One of the most, this was a huge practical lesson for me. And this was one of those things that's so kind of basic that it changes everything. And sorry, I am in some really weird kind of summer evening lighting here. This was like the best I could do for lighting. But understanding this has changed the way that I live so much, and it's changed the way I think about myself and think about life. And I so wish, this is one of those ideas that I wish that I had learned when I was much younger, when I was like a teenager or a young woman, because it would have changed so much for me. And I think this is really the case for a lot of people, and our society gets this really, really wrong. So this is kind of like a big pet issue with me. And that is the concept of introversion and extroversion, and really the understanding of the internal world. And what we're taught about that, at least the message that I got growing up, and I think a lot of people get this message loud and clear, is that what you do externally is really the only thing that matters, and it's the only thing that really determines your success in life. Now I'm going to explain this in terms of introversion and extroversion, because I know I'm not arguing with the concept that, yeah, some people naturally fall into recharging their energy by being around other people. That's more natural to their personality. Maybe it's what they grew up with in their family, whatever. Some people do fall more naturally into recharging their batteries, if you will, their energy from being alone and having quiet time and solitude. And I think we're taught that, I know I got the message growing up that natural extroverts just have an advantage in life because, again, this fits into a belief system that says the external world is what matters and what college degrees you have and, whatever grades and athletic ability. And I'm not saying that those things don't matter, but I think what lots and lots of people are missing, and what I was missing for decades until I started doing brain retraining and nervous system retraining and meditation, was that the real truth is that your internal world, especially when you're an adult, when you're a child, your world is going to be created largely by your parents and your caregivers because you're not the one making the big choices. But as an adult, your world is actually created by you and your choices, and it's actually created by your internal world is going to create and be kind of inseparable from your external world. In other words, if you do what I did and what many, many people do in this society, is that we focus only on outward success, working 50, 60, 70, 80 hours a week, cutting down our sleep, working a long day, and then also exercising and kind of feeling like we're fighting and fighting and fighting to try to succeed. And I'm not saying that there isn't a place for discipline. There absolutely is a place for discipline and for hard work. But what happens is people end up completely ignoring their internal reality. So, their thoughts, their mind, their emotions, their creativity, and to their detriment. And then they don't understand why they're sort of running so hard in a hamster wheel and feeling like they're not getting anywhere. I want to give you an example here. The easiest way to see this is in artists. And the truth is, it's everybody. It's just easier to see it in artists. So if you think about someone who makes their money, maybe they're a novelist, they're a writer. Their novels actually they're sort of like a fruit or a blossom from their inner world. And then think about how this cycle works. So you have a novelist, maybe they have a rich internal world, they have a beautiful fantasy life, they have a beautiful, creative life within themselves. They write a novel, and then that novel sells and makes them money, and that's what pays for their house and their food. So the internal, something that started as invisible, something that started as being the world of emotions and creativity and thought, became the house that they live in and the bread that they eat. It went from the inside to the outside. And what happens when we're ignoring our internal world, when we're not cultivating that, when we're not having nourishing rest, when we're not having nourishing solitude, when we're not feeding our minds with beautiful things, beautiful music, ideas that we find captivating, is that our internal world can start to become like a desert, and it doesn't bear any fruit. It doesn't create anything. We start to become empty. And if this continues to go on, it will, for many people, probably most people, eventually result in mental or physical breakdown, chronic illness, mysterious depression, or just a feeling of emptiness or being overstressed. And the truth is, it's like this with everyone, because your mental state, your inner world, and how peaceful that is and how positive that is going to be the thing that ultimately makes your decisions. So, for instance, if you're in a positive mindset, expecting good things to come to you, job opportunities to come to you, you're going to have your eyes open for that, and you're going to see that. You're either going to create it, or you're going to be looking on Indeed for awesome jobs, or you're going to notice opportunities when they cross your path. But if your internal world has become a desert, you're not going to recognize those things even when they're right in front of you. What I've found through many, many years, many decades of doing this wrong, of trying to push on the outward things and pretend that what was going on inside didn't matter, is that the only thing that works, if you're an adult, is taking full responsibility for what goes on in your outer world. And we all know this. We have to take responsibility for our job, and our relationships are actually something that I would say is a crossover thing. I think your relationships are both your outer world, and in a sense they're also your inner world, because they're involving so much of your heart and your inner reality. You have to take responsibility for those things. But the only thing that works in life is also taking responsibility to what I would say as cultivate your inner garden. And this may actually mean taking hours away from working out in the gym, getting that master's degree. It actually takes putting time and effort into it. But the only way to be, not only to be a happy, mentally healthy, physically healthy, balanced person, but ultimately the only way in the long term, not just over a period of 6 months or 1 year or 2 years, but in the long term, the only way to be a successful person is to be that person who's taking responsibility for their outer world, but also their inner world. Because your inner world, if it's neglected, if that garden is running wild and it's full of weeds, or it's a desert, not at first, maybe not in the first 6 months or the first year or in the first 2 years, but ultimately it's going to become your life. Like, if we use our example of the novelist again, and I understand that this is easiest with artists, which is why I'm using this example, but we are going to talk about some other examples in a minute. When that person's inner world has become empty, has become a desert, or has become run over, their garden is full of weeds, their novels are not good, or they're facing writer's block. And look how much that's going to affect their life, because they're not writing novels as their job. So now they don't have income coming in. Now they're facing deadlines from their publisher, and then they're stressed out and frustrated, and then that's going to affect their intimate relationships. This is really true of anything, because if you think about, let's say, a politician who's been pounding the pavement, promoting themselves, but they're ignoring their home life, eventually their home life is going to kind of get worse and worse. They may or may not be aware of what's going on with that, until eventually that can turn into a breakdown or a scandal. And if they're unhappy inside, if their inner world has become really empty and fruitless, that's going to eventually show. That's going to show in the way they engage in their political debates, for example. Because what you have on the inside really does end up showing on the outside. And this way that we're taught in society of ignoring rest, ignoring sleep, treating your body like it's sort of a car that you can just, pump the gas and force it to go faster and faster. That doesn't work, because we're not a car, right? We're a living being, and we have heart and mind and soul. And it's challenging, because if you've ever tried to really take responsibility for your outer world and be on top of that, you know how much work that is. You know that you're really doing something when you do that. Well, guess what? It's also work to take responsibility for your inner world. And it takes your time and it takes your effort. And I would say I've only been walking on this path, or I've only really understood this for the past, 2 years maybe. And I would still say that I'm feeling in life like I'm often trying to keep plates spinning as I'm trying to handle and balance my inner world and also take responsibility for my outer world and my relationships. But not only is it so worth it, I also strongly feel that, in a sense, it's the only option. Because if you're going to have real success, you're going to need to be kind of thriving and healthy across the board. If you are driving in one area and ignoring the other areas, what's going to happen is those other areas that you've been ignoring will eventually come in and sort of create a crisis that's going to affect everything. So I'm a huge proponent of saying, if you're naturally extroverted, what I would say is actually think about, consciously choose to study, how can I nourish my inner world? And am I really taking care of what's going on the inside? And am I really getting enough sleep? Or am I trying to win by depriving myself of sleep, which is ultimately going to wear down my health over time? And I would say, if you're a person who tends to want to avoid people, I would say not so much brutally pushing yourself to be more social, but maybe looking inside and saying, am I really meeting my needs here? Are my needs for friendship and belonging and real connection, are those needs getting met? Or am I kind of repressing all that and pretending that I don't have those needs, which in the long term, again, does not work. I actually don't believe anymore. I do at job interviews sometimes, but I don't really describe myself as introverted or extroverted. I think everyone is really called to a balance, because, and then trying to, even once you're doing both those things, you're still going to have to seek out the balance that works. But I think that's what everyone is really called to. I don't think that there's a way to end up fulfilling your potential in life without looking at it that way. And I'm hoping that we're going to see eventually like a societal shift. Instead of raising our children to just entirely focus on the outside, we're teaching them also to cultivate an inner garden, and seeing that that is actually, in more practical ways than you might think, that inner world is going to become your outer world. So it's really, really important. I think that's all I've got for today. Thanks for letting me share. Hope to get more videos coming up on the regular basis here. So bye.